Right. This is a note to self in a sense. Lots of realizations, lots of understandings over the past while, as usual. Constantly trying to gain a new perspective, gain a new understanding of things. And I guess this is just going to be sort of a note to self and a note to anyone listening of maybe they're at a point, maybe you're at a point where I was, I don't know, 3 months ago, because I'd say that a lot of the information I've sort of taken on and absorbed and understanding I've gained has been hefty in the past 3 months, maybe even a bit longer than that. And yeah, maybe this will help you skip some steps completely. And also maybe there's someone out there who has been in the position I'm in right now and sort of is able to even give some insight of where they think they could maybe even be of help or advice or whatever. I don't really know. Say maybe this is even for myself again in the future, who knows, look back at the video, see where I was at. Again, just a note to self. It's probably going to be very random and sporadic. I've not really got anything noted down. Maybe start doing that eventually, but yeah, at the moment it was just very much probably just to clear my own mind, partly, and maybe a few lessons here that I could maybe teach. That it's not as if I'd be the first person to teach them, I'm sure. However, maybe this will be the first time you hear them. Yeah, like I said, might help you. I'd say one of the first things is definitely something that I held strong to myself, which was at a younger stage in my life when I just decided one day, right, that's enough. Like, there's no point in lying. There's no need to lie about small little things, big things, anything. If I'm looking to, I don't know, guess, if I'm ever in a position where I feel the need to lie, then that means I shouldn't have done that thing in the first place, I guess. Or I know. There was definitely a day in my life when I just decided, look, lying ain't the way. Lying is not what I'm going to do. Lying is what I'm, with what I almost like just from that day forward hated. So I made sure that truth was the only thing that was sort of coming out of my mouth or coming out of my character. And I'd say that it's definitely a good concept and idea and way to live to an extent. And I'd say that I learned that extent very recently, because although me being completely 100% truthful about anything, it meant that I sort of had clarity of, meant that I had sort of a peace of mind of my character and knowing that, well, can't really necessarily, I guess, even throw that on my name for lack of a better term, just because of how truthful I knew I was. And if I said something, I meant it, and if I meant something, I'd say it. Like, I wouldn't really hold back on saying things. I wouldn't feel the need to. I wouldn't feel the need to white lie, sugarcoat. Like, I'd sort of say it as it is. And again, obviously people weren't really fond of having someone be like that with them. I guess I maybe got that from just sort of the harsh reality of growing up in a household where you were just sort of told things as it was and as they were. There was no sugarcoating. There was no sort of cop-outs at all. The standard was very high, and upholding that standard was of utmost importance always. And maybe, I don't know, I took it on a little bit too much. But yeah, I would say there's not too much truth that can be told. If it's truth and it's happened, and it is what it is. If you're not ready to accept and face the truth, then I think it's something that you should look at for yourself for sure. But like I said, that was the sort of mantra I sort of rode with for a very long time. However, after a conversation with a lot of people, conversation even with flipping ChatGPT, and just a lot of perspectives that I managed to take on, I realised that truth is fine, and truth is probably optimal and what you want. However, I think there's a sort of split at a point where you realise that you might be that person that just constantly tells the truth. You don't tell lies. There's nothing about you that you would be sort of ashamed of saying, because it is just the truth and your truth and just the reality of things. However, it comes a point where maybe when you're being truthful with others, that something comes into play where you realize that you being truthful doesn't have to happen. However, it doesn't mean that you need to lie. It just means more so that you maybe don't tell or speak all truth points, and only the truth points that will allow you to move forward in a constructive way. Because sometimes a lot of the time, being truthful and just saying things how they are can always cause a sort of subconscious resentment in people, which I'm sure that you guys have realised and felt yourself too, because I have, for sure. I've had people tell me things as they were, to the point where I was like, damn, do I really have to know that? And it doesn't really put you in a position where you feel the need that you want to even, there's nothing really constructive that comes of that. And it was definitely a hard realisation, especially, considering for all them years I held truth to such a high regard, and not necessarily letting it go, but I would say that I had to shift my perspective there big time to one of clarity, and clarity of mind, and understanding that yes, truth is still the forefront of character and the forefront of my being. However, it's supplemented with, I'm trying to find the exact word, give me a second, because I was having this conversation. No, not this one, maybe this one. So this is quite funny, but I'm just reading through here. Strategic clarity, resistance is constant. Because even with truth, came to realise that truth is almost chastising people, because at least that's the way it will sort of come across. So what it was having truth plus self-awareness to create a sort of clarity of mind, just to sort of create that clarity, that self. So what it said was, it sounds like you've reached a level of strategic self-awareness, understanding that truth is a tool, and the key is using it in a way that aligns with your bigger goals. This shows a high level of emotional intelligence, especially in navigating how to communicate in a way that's both authentic and effective. So I think what it said there at the middle part, where it was talking about how using the truth as a key when needed, because at the end of the day, a key is a key, but it doesn't mean that it's going to open the door to that room, although it is a key, although it is the truth. And maybe there's two rooms here and two doors, and it's like, okay, this is a key of truth, but there's another key of truth that you can maybe take that will open that door much easier, rather than having to maybe ram through the door, which is going to cause someone resentment, because you've just rammed through their door and you've not really taken them into consideration, or the only thing you've taken into consideration is truth. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily entirely hard to take it on, but it was a real, I guess, maybe sobering perspective to realise that it's not all just truth. Yes, truth is a big part of it, it still is, and I wouldn't suggest lying, because there's no point. There's no need either, even about small things. I think a lot of people get that misconstrued, that there's no importance, or there's no level of importance to small things, so you can lie about the small things, and the only things you should tell the truth about is the big things. But then that sort of gets lost in translation, and you end up lying about everything anyway, or finding a way to lie about it and make it look truthful when it's not, and be very deceitful. So I'd say truth is a big one, but having that self-awareness for yourself and awareness for others, and trying to understand them, I'd say it's definitely important. For just reaching that level of clarity that's needed to actually progress and be constructive. And then another thing I realised was, because of how truthful I sort of was and just continued being, when I wasn't that way, and I have been that way with people, where I've just held my tongue, I'd say maybe too much, and not said anything at all. And what happens at that point, and I was having this discussion with Jeff, which was, it warps their threshold or understanding, or just their I'm gonna have to find a word for it, but their understanding of respect between you. So I think you have a level of respect, a general level of respect between people, and when you both come in at a level, that respect sort of holds. However, if one of yous, like I did, was sort of just a lot like laid back in a sense and not really the usual way that I was, like holding things to a high standard, I was sort of just letting things slide that I wouldn't usually slide, and just letting things be because I thought that was the best way to move forward. So I think this is where that self-awareness and awareness of others really comes into play, where it's you don't just let things slide. You do hold people accountable, but you hold them accountable in a way that will still allow them to be constructive and progress, and rather than holding them accountable in a way that almost closes them off to everything. And that's definitely easier said than done. I'd say that a lot of people can speak on that and act as if like they just talk a lot on it, but actually doing that I think is very different. And I think there are prerequisites to that. But as I was saying, that threshold or understanding of respect, when I was doing that and sort of letting things slide and not being true to myself the way that I would usually be, that made that understanding of respect go down and warp, and there wasn't that understanding of what respect was anymore. So then when I got to a point where obviously it made me very uncomfortable being in a situation where there was like just almost being walked over, so to speak. And not, just being walked over. I was going to fucking sugarcoat that, but there's no point. Just being walked over in a sense. Not completely, but yes, being walked over, end of story. When you're now being walked over and you stand up and they're unable to walk over you in that same capacity anymore, even if it's a small capacity, but if you're then trying to bring it back up to this level playing field of how it should be, because you've been down here for so long, they've now sort of, they almost expect that from you. So if you now move even up slightly, it's almost as if you've disrespected them in that regard, because that's not what they were used to from you. So now they expect you to be that way that they've sort of seen that whole time. So now if you're actually yourself now, which is holding high standards, etc., it's very difficult for them to understand that that's just sort of the way you are, because it's not the way you've been. And the reason I'm saying that is because you want to just hold your standard as a standard, or the way you are as the way you are, or the way you operate in small things and big things. You want to keep them the same. The way you treat a waiter is the same way that you treat the president of your country, or someone that you hold of high regards and importance. Not to say that there aren't levels of importance to people, but that level and discrepancy and importance, at the end of the day, they are still people, and you should just hold them to the same regard. Like I say, was making that example, even the waitress and the chef or whatever, or whoever it may be. I'm sure you can think of the examples yourself, but making sure that that's consistent throughout will actually allow you to be able to just be consistent throughout. Because when you make these small inconsistencies of even thinking that someone is above someone else, so you treat them differently, results in things that you're doing will also be very inconsistent and warped, which is sort of the last thing you want. If you're able to do something at a small level, you're going to be able to do it at a big level and in the middle. However, if you have that mindset that you should only be doing something at a specific level of whatever, then doing it at a smaller level when you're forced to do it at a smaller level, and not necessarily forced, but when it comes time to do it at a smaller level, you're going to really struggle to do it at that smaller level. And that's where your sort of real character comes out of. You're only that sort of person because of this, and you're not actually authentically that person. And I think that's where problems start to seep in. So yeah, probably rambled on a little bit there, but I'd say if you're to take anything from that, it's definitely be truthful, and maybe not crutch that, but add a duality to that, or not even a duality, but just a symbiosis, let's say. I don't know, whatever word you want to use, but just add to that a level of awareness and understanding around the truth and how that's going to actually affect you, and whether that's going to be a net negative or a net positive. and go with the net positive of what your desired reality or your desired outcome is. And then also making sure you hold that standard consistently, regardless of who it is, what you're doing, whatever, it needs to be held consistent. So if you hold it at a high standard, you need to hold it at a high standard across the board. If you, let's say for example, like I'm trying to make an example that you can think of. Yeah, so let's say for example there's tasks within the work that you're doing right now. Let's say for example I think this is probably going to be self-explanatory, but if you're like someone that builds homes, for example, your level of intention and level of standard for, maybe you're enthusiastic about a bathroom and you really enjoy that bathroom aspect of things, and your level of intention and enthusiasm towards that bathroom and that effort that you have for that, say for example you just despise kitchens, that level of intention and enthusiasm you put in that bathroom is the same level of intention and enthusiasm you should be putting into that kitchen, because they are one and the same. It's at the end of the day, whether it's a thing that you like or don't like, if it's something that you're doing as a whole, you holding it to a different regard shouldn't dictate the level of effort that you put into it. If you're only going to put effort into the things that, I'm trying to think of a better example, but into the things that into the big things, the small things are going to suffer, and when the small things start suffering, the big things will suffer too, because if them big things end up being looked at, directly, you'll see little problems within the big things too. And I think that house example wasn't the greatest of example, but right now I can't really, well, I probably can, but I'm just trying to think of a very good example for this. I think. So like even maybe clothes, it's difficult. I'm trying to think of an example. I'm sure, like the example that I have in my head is, I'd say a more personal one, and it would make sense. Like in fact, I can make a correlation to it. As for example, if you have a client that's bringing you in $100,000, but one client is bringing you in $10,000, whether or not these clients, because people tend to have the notion that, it's usually the one that's earning the least amount of money that has the most sort of problems, and the one that doesn't earn, that does bring in loads of money, tends not to have so many problems. And the chances are that you can also almost boil that down every single time to yourself. Nothing else than yourself. And sort of knowing that, I think, brings sort of comfortability in the fact that you control it. So what I'm trying to explain is, if you have two clients, one bringing you in 100,000, one's bringing in 10,000, the level of the standards that you have at the 100,000 level shouldn't change even an inch when you're down at the 10,000 level. That standard should be held at both levels, regardless. Like if it's because I think a lot of people have the idea and the notion that I can just, why would I do it at this small level when I can just do it at this big level, make more and have less stress, rather than understanding, well, if you can do it at the small level and make even a small amount of money and not have stress because you've worked it to that point that it's actually that good of a thing or a product, that at the small levels it's not an issue, then translating that over into a bigger level is so much easier. However, doing the reverse from a big level where you can get away with so much, and then having to scale that back down into a small level, and this is a discussion I'll probably have tomorrow with my brother, but trying to scale that back down into a small level, it's not impossible, but it's going to sort of expose the flaws that you had, because a lot of things sort of go missing and just sort of go under the radar and things like that, which is the last thing you want. So if you do have that idea that one thing's more important than another, or one thing deserves your focus more because it's bigger, then you should shift that perspective to the smaller thing actually deserves your focus more, because if you refine that perfectly, then it's going to easily translate into the bigger. But the bigger thing, there's just so much more you can get away with, and that's the same with when you're hiring, which is one of the things that we've sort of been doing. And I realised while hiring that yes, you have those that are just able to just get it and they're able to do whatever, and they're just very, they can take their own initiative and smart and all these things. That doesn't mean that if you have a training schedule or whatever it is that you do, that you disregard that just because they have natural ability. Because that just now means that when that natural ability isn't a factor or they're having an off day, they're going to fall down to their system of training that you've provided. And if you haven't provided any training, then you're in for a hot one. You are in for a hot one. And yeah, I think you can sort of extrapolate that to a lot of things. A lot of things, but I'd say the main ones are those ones. So maybe that's 4 points. Truth, definitely be truthful. Have that clarity of mind and self-awareness. Having that consistency and self-respect constantly. Just making sure you're consistent. And then, yeah, again, the consistency ties into the business aspect of things, where whatever scale you're doing it at, it needs to have the same level of commitment, attention to detail as everything else. And actually, the smaller it is, the better, because then you can build towards the bigger, and not much changes at the base level. Maybe things change as you get bigger, yes, but those things will be easier addressed if the foundations, so yeah, I guess the foundations are steady in the way they should be. So I guess that's maybe what the house analogy would have worked better if, yeah, you need to make sure that the foundation of things are actually the way they're supposed to be, because yeah, building on top of something just because you want to focus on just building the house and you don't want to be bothered with the foundation, you have to realise that everything's built on that foundation, and that foundation tends to be found at the lower levels of things, and they need to be done the best always. So I guess I could maybe title this, the small things matter the most, but that's probably a crap title, so I'll use Lucy's brain. Let me text him now actually. But yeah, anyway, yeah, I'd say if you're going to do something and you feel like it's too small of a job for you, then yeah, if you think it's too small of a job for you, you shouldn't be doing it at a big scale either. If it's too small of a job for you, then it's too big of a job for you, because it's the small things that actually are way more important and are a big thing. But again, you want to just have that consistent mindset of just making sure that the small things aren't sort of looked down upon. Yeah, even though it's easy to do, the small things are where the real, I guess, gems or diamonds are at. So definitely look out more for the small and what you can refine in the small aspects of your life, rather than just trying to address the big things, because the big things will 9 times out of 10, and I could probably go ahead and say 10 times out of 10, be solved when you solve those small things. So actually, the smaller the better. That's what I'm going to call this. The smaller, the better.